and welcome to Music of the Two Rivers. Today we're going to be talking about the third episode of the Amazon Prime TV series, The Wheel of Time. Our main characters have split up into 3 different groups, so we're going to tackle this episode in 3 segments. So let's begin with what is undoubtedly the best arc so far, because I am not biased at all about Daniel Henney, Nynaeve, Lan, and Moiraine. Now, this opening scene is actually the scene that made me want to start doing these musical reviews. I am a very big fan of horror movies. My favorite horror movie is actually Suspiria, the original one, not the crappy remake, done by Dario Argento. Suspiria is what we call a giallo film. It follows this really demented ballet academy, and it's absolutely crazy. I absolutely love anything ever written by Goblin for Argento because all of their music is absolutely nuts. The opening of this episode has Nynaeve running through the woods, and the woods are very dark behind her, and you can hear her labored breaths as she's just trying to escape. And it is exactly like the opening of Suspiria, not just with the visuals of the woman running through the woods, but also in the distorted, crazy noises that we get instead of a regular musical soundtrack as she is trying to escape this thing that is definitely going to kill her if she doesn't. I'll put a link to the intro to Suspiria down in the description here. Be forewarned, it is very graphic past that opening bit. I can't help but wonder if the composer was influenced at all by Goblin's soundtrack in Suspiria, because honestly, if I saw this muted with no sound, I would instantly recall the soundtrack of Suspiria and go, oh, I've got to do something like that there. In both Argento's films and in this opening scene here, the visuals are very striking, they're very important, but the music is what ties it all together. As this scene continues, we get the Trolloc looking for Nynaeve, and then this intense conflict between them, and they sink into the pool, and there's a moment of silence. Then Nynaeve emerges from the pool, and this triumphant chord of strings rings out, and it's this E minor chord that tells us, okay, she's pissed. Now, the next little musical thing that we get with Nynaeve is when she's going and foraging for things to help heal Moiraine. Lan is sitting over there in the corner watching her, and we get this lovely little vocal track. And I had a look-see at the official Wheel of Time playlist in order to isolate just the vocals, and I couldn't help myself but try to figure out what exactly the lyrics are. I pulled out my trusty Wheel of Time companion, which has a whole little bit on the old tongue, and I tried my best to decipher the lyrics. Mashiara Selfred Novani Klebia Avenia Frelia Vin No vete. That's what I think the lyrics are. I'm pretty sure that's what the lyrics are. Based on what I could understand of the lyrics, the approximate translation for these is a bit of a spoiler, so skip ahead if you haven't read the books. My love is strong, give for my own past, my own call, our promise is given true. This obviously sounds a bit like gibberish, but given that the Old Tongue is kind of like Latin, where the order of words doesn't really matter as much as the context of said words, we can surmise a meaning from this that is something like, my love is strong because of my past, my call, our promise is true. Now, my second favorite couple in the series is Lan and Nynaeve. So I love that the introduction of their relationship is in this song while Lan is watching her work. That's really where his infatuation with Nynaeve comes from, her competence. I love this song, I really do, but there's one thing about it that bugs me, and it's just because I'm a violinist. There is a lot of what we call tremolo, which is where we do this. And as you can see, there's a lot of wiggling, and that wiggling often causes a lot of tension here in the forearm, and it's just not fun to play. It feels like you're giving yourself carpal tunnel. And it's a great effect, but as a violinist, I don't like it. I don't like playing it. And whenever I hear it, I'm like, oh, those poor musicians. The final part of this arc that I'll comment on today is when Moraine is just laying there and she's about to wake up. And we hear that familiar oscillation that we get in the opening number and in Moraine's theme of the violins, but this time it's passed through different instruments in the orchestra, and it goes through different intervals, it goes through different pitches, and it just goes to show the uncertain nature of this moment. Is Moraine going to be okay? And as Moraine opens her eyes, we hear the familiar chimes that indicate the one power. Speaking of channeling, now let's get to talking about Egwene and Perrin's arc here. As the two of them sit at what is about to be a fire, Egwene concentrates, attempting to channel, and there's no music, there's just this slight whine that we hear, almost like tinnitus, and then boom, fire. So we don't really know if it's Perrin that caused that spark or if it was Egwene. And I like that there's no definite wind chimes or oscillation in the violins telling us, yep, this is the one power. It leaves it up to interpretation for the viewer. Then we get to Perrin's dreams, and I'm sure this is apparent to both non-book readers as well as book readers. Dreams are in fact important in this series, and the weird thing about this dream is that the only music we get for the majority of it is the sound of wind chimes, which, as we know, indicates the one power. So, a bit spooky there. Then we get the sound of the oscillating violins getting higher and higher and higher in pitch as we close in on Layla being eaten by a wolf. So take from that what you will, but I think it's pretty clear what the composer is trying to spell out here. Once again, Perrin and Egwene must run from the wolves, and we get a nice new motif here. The percussion is playing 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2. And so we have a really odd meter here. We're counting in 10, 3, 3, 2, 2. This weird meter that doesn't really have any center because it's based in 5 is such a great way to put the audience on their seats. It actually took me listening to this a couple of times for me to realize, oh, that's what's going on. If you listen to the percussion line, you can hear it better. Soon after, Perrin and Egwene find safety with the Tinkers, and we get this exact same motif, but played in 4, and now it's nice and gentle and safe and warm, and it's the same notes, but it feels so different. When a composer can take a simple motif like this, G, C, G, A flat, and make it gentle and loving and sweet just as easily as they can make it manic and crazed and brutal, that is just awesome. And I have to stress, it's not the instruments that make the difference here, it's the tempo and the meter. The fact that he is willing to play with those things in a not so common way. I mean, how many soundtracks are in 5 or 10? It's really, really cool. Now let's get to the arc I've been wanting to talk about this whole time. Rand and Mat and our new buddy, THOM. As Rand and Mat enter this new town, we hear this common motif repeating over and over and over again. And it's played over the strings with this electric guitar accompanying it and a snare drum in the back just showing us, okay, something's gonna happen here. Gradually fades away, ending when they enter this tavern. We quickly meet Dana, who is a bartender, and I immediately remembered Dina from the books. For those of you who care to remember Dina, she had like one chapter. She was a woman who wanted to become the first female Glee man. I was really looking forward to the introduction of Dina, but I know that's such a small character that it makes sense to not include her in the show. So I think they may have gone ahead and replaced Dina with Dana. Their names are so similar, it makes sense. But it would have been nice to have a female musician on the show, don't you think? So moving on to the first song that Tom sings, our introduction to Tom. Oh, this song, guys, it's so great. Now, before we get into it, I made my own arrangement of this song. It is right here if you want to go take a look at it. Now we're going to start out with a couple of spoilers. If you haven't read the books, please skip on ahead. Obviously, this song is about the prologue of The Eye of the World. It's about the breaking. It's about Luz Theron. But it's from the perspective of the person who observed Luz Theron, aka Ishamael. So I am of the opinion that Asmodean is the one who wrote this song, because Ishamael cannot keep his mouth shut, and definitely blabbed to the other Forsaken as soon as he could. I know a lot of fans were disappointed that we didn't get the prologue, or perhaps glad that we didn't get the prologue in this TV series if you've watched Winter Dragon. But this song, it takes like, a minute and a half, and it replaces the whole prologue. It's just vague enough that people who aren't book readers just listen to it and go, oh, that's a nice song, and they don't realize it's about anything specific. But if you are a book reader, you go, this may seem like a complete tangent, but Stephen Sondheim is the greatest lyricist of all time, and I don't think anyone can disagree with that. He just passed away a couple of days ago, and it greatly saddened the whole musical community, not just musical theater, but everybody, because the man truly was a titan of the industry, and he revolutionized so many things, not just in music, but in lyric writing, especially in lyric writing. I started rereading the books that he wrote, and a bit caught my eye at the very beginning of the introduction of this particular book. Lyrics are not written to be read, but to be sung, and sung as parts of a larger structure. Furthermore, almost all of the lyrics in these pages were written not just to be sung, but to be sung in particular musicals by individual characters in specific situations. A printed collection of them, bereft of their dramatic circumstances and the music which gives them life, is a dubious proposition. Lyrics, even poetic ones, are not poems. Poems are written to be read silently or aloud, not sung. Some lyrics, awash with florid imagery, present themselves as poetry, but music only underscores, yes, the self-consciousness of the effort. In theatrical fact, it is usually the plainer and flatter lyric that soars poetically when infused with music. The reason I bring this up is because the lyrics in this song exactly describe what Sondheim is talking about in this introduction paragraph. This song doesn't really make sense written down, but when it's sung, you know exactly what it means. You can hear the longing, you can hear the devastation. You can also hear kind of the braggart way about it, that Ishamael is saying, yes, this happened, and it's this man's fault. The breaking of the world was caused by the only man who could truly mourn it. But what's more intriguing in that opening paragraph there is that songs are meant to be sung by specific characters in musical theater. And here, this particular song is meant to be sung by Tom. Tom promises to tell this story, the story of the Dragon Reborn and all of these other people whose lives he touched in this dawning of the Third Age. How fitting is it that his introduction to the man whose story he is about to tell is recounting the story of the last dragon. The poetic nature of this whole encounter is just wonderful. Now the spoilers are over. For now, the spoilers are over. Let's talk about instrumentation here. Tom tunes his guitar and then sits there and sings a cappella for a couple of bars. and then starts plucking along. My composition teacher once told me that it is always a brave choice when you do something a cappella, and sometimes it is a stupid choice. You either do a cappella really, really well, or you don't. There is no in between. And it is done really, really well here. The actor, whose name I can't quite figure out how to pronounce, has a beautiful voice. He also has a huge range, just like Tom, with the difference between common and high chant and all that. I'm sure they'll get into that later. But he chooses to sing this song with a very grumbly, low voice. It's very low in his register, but it gets higher, and you can hear the strain in his voice as he's trying to keep low in that register and still reach those higher pitches. And it really matches the tone of this song. To demonstrate what I mean, listen to how it sounds when I sing the very first line two completely different ways. The colors of his morning, the darkness of his night. The colors of his morning, the darkness of his night. I'm not the best singer in the world, but you can hear the stark difference in tone there. Both, I'm putting a certain emotion into it, but the actual approach with my voice creates an entirely different effect. I have seen a lot of people complain that Tom here sounds more like Tom Waits than Tom Merlin, but I think it works. Now, another complaint I've seen a lot about all over the place is that Tom plays the guitar rather than the harp and the flute. Now, there are a lot of artistic reasons why the guitar makes sense, and historical reasons too. I mean, like, there are a lot of reasons that we could talk about, but there's one big reason that stands out to me as an actual musician. I don't know if any of you guys have heard of Two Set Violin, but they have done a whole series of videos where they go and look at people playing the violin in movies, and they dissect A, why it isn't real, B, why it draws them out of the action, and C, why it sucks. The common theme is that regardless of how well done it is or how badly done it is, it pulls them out of the action. The actor who plays Tom knows how to play the guitar. And in this scene, he is actually playing the guitar. And as a musician, it immerses me in that moment so much better than if he were plucking away at a harp and they edited that sound out because he had no idea what he was actually doing. It is so obvious to me and to every other musician out there when somebody is faking a performance on TV or in a movie. I mean, it is obvious enough that I have stopped watching shows before because they couldn't be bothered to hire an actual musician. Rafe has said that they hired this actor to play Tom because he gave the right vibe, essentially, and he just happened to play the guitar, so that's what they went with. And I think that was the right choice because musicians don't have to suffer for 8 seasons or however long this thing is going to end up going. One interesting thing to note here is that Tom is the second character that we've seen begin to sing. And it's fascinating that Tom and Matt share these two similarities between episode 2 and episode 3. This is just one of the many similarities between these two characters. I won't get into any book spoilers regarding their relationship, I promise. Now, hallelujah, we get our first Matt character moment with music. Now, before we get into that actual moment, what has changed in Matt's life? Tom. Tom has entered Matt's life. Again, I won't get into any book spoilers, but I want to. Matt expresses the beginnings of his desire to just go back home. Dana responds saying, oh, well, I'm impressed that you got out. I mean, I'd do anything to get out of this dirt hole. This is our first moment where we get to hear Matt's inner monologue through the music. And it's a solo violin playing this lovely line with this weird, dissonant, funky bass going on underneath. This is such a beautiful musical line, and we just hear one iteration of it, this longing for home, before we cut to the next scene. But I think it's the perfect little way to show Matt feels alone, and all he wants is to be back home in the Two Rivers. It's all he wants in the world. I also appreciate that the composer isn't choosing to characterize all the men with bass instruments and all the women with treble instruments. It's just so much better this way. Matt is characterized with a violin, while Dana is characterized with this weird funky bass line going on underneath. It's a complete flip on what we usually hear. Now getting back to my boy Tom, I absolutely love his intro music. This arpeggiated chord on the guitar from the top pitches down, I think it's an E minor chord, with a little B flat sustaining on the top. Oof, it is so much like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I love it. I'm half expecting the da-da-da, wah-wah-wah, which is perfect. And then when he leaves, we get this pulsing E flat, just one note on a solo bass guitar. Oof. If you get great entrance and exit music, you know the composer loves you. We get another musical moment for Matt, this time when he's robbing the Aiel. This theme sounds very familiar. La, do, re. I really think it's Thom's influence, however brief so far, that is having this effect on Matt, this change in Matt. Now we're going to get into book spoilers, so skip on ahead if you don't want to hear them. I've seen a lot of people complain about the fact that when Rand breaks down this unbreakable door, we don't get this big flashy moment that lets us know he's using the one power to do it. However, I would argue that actually we did, y'all. In the lead up to Rand about to break down this unbreakable door, we get, louder than it has ever been so far in the whole show, those oscillating violins that tell us, hey, this is the one power, y'all! Then when Rand is actually breaking down the door, there's this swell in the music as it gets intense and intense, 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 and then he breaks it down and it just goes. And this music is very similar to music in the next episode when Logain is doing his thing. We'll get into that more in the next video, but y'all, like I said in my review of episode 1, which you can find, on this side, up here, the one power's usage isn't just shown with visual effects in this show, it's also shown to us, I'm saying show a lot, through aural cues. We get the chimes when someone is touching the one power, and we get these oscillating violins or whatever instrument it happens to be at the time to let us know something is happening. Done with the book spoilers. As Rand and Matt are escaping from Dana, or at least trying to, there is a sudden key change as we go from a key that is comfortable for stringed instruments to a key that is more comfortable for brass instruments, which is very considerate of the composer, considering he made the violins do tremolo for like 3 whole minutes previously in the episode. So we get this nice moment of the brass playing this creepy little interlude that sounds very insistent and hopeful and longing, while at the same time clearly evil, as Dana is talking about being a dark friend. It comes back almost immediately as we get to the next scene with Leandrin and Logain, and you guys can make your own assumptions from why he did that. Who knows? The book readers do, but who knows? Let's end with overall impressions of this episode. We got the introduction of Tom with a really great song. We got the first little blossoming bits of a potential relationship between Lan and Nynaeve, along with a beautiful little song to go with that. But most importantly, we finally got music for Matt. I do have one complaint about this episode, and it's a pretty significant one. The most important thing about the Tuathaan, the Tinkers, whatever you want to call them, is they're searching for the song. And in this episode, the only glimpse into their lives that we get through music is with the change of situation for Perrin and Egwene that is mirrored through the use of the same motif we got with the chase with the wolves. It's not anything specific to the Tuathaan. You would think for a culture that has so much to do with music, we would get a lot more music with them. But instead, when we first meet the Tinkers, it's this silent, awkward confrontation in the woods. And it doesn't have that vibe that we're supposed to get, or that I think we're supposed to get from the Tinkers. Once again, I would like to point out that it's good that I'm complaining about what isn't there rather than what is. 100% of the music that we got was perfect, in my very much subjective opinion. I'm not going to denigrate this episode for what it was lacking. Instead, I'd like to just praise it for what we got. After all, the show is designed to be binged, because that is the current culture with the internet and all that, and in the next episode, we will get some musical moments with the Tuathaan. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, please like this video, and if you want to see more, don't forget to subscribe. I recommend going and checking out my review for episode 2, as well as my arrangement of Tom's song. That's all for today. Bye, y'all.